The reading today is a selection from Susan B. Anthony's presentation in 1863, which was an address to the Women's Loyal National League, and this was selected by Peg. The hour is fully come when woman shall no longer be the passive recipient of whatever morals and religion the trade and politics of the nation may decree, but that she shall assume her God-given responsibilities and make herself what she is clearly designed to be, the educator of the race. And now, I ask you to rise up with earnest, honest purpose, to speak the true word and do the just work, in season and out of season. I ask you to forget that you are women and go forward in the way of right, fearlessly, as independent human beings, responsible to God alone for the discharge of every duty, for the faithful use of every gift, for the multiplying tenfold every talent the good Father has given you. Forget conventionalisms, forget what the world will say, whether you are in your place or out of your place. Think your best thoughts, speak your best words, do your best works, looking only to suffering humanity, your own conscience, and God for approval. Today I'm really happy to introduce you to Peg Eaton, who has a special fondness for Susan B. Anthony and has had her whole life and career. Peg, who many of you know, has been a leader in the Jackson community and a lifelong activist on behalf of women. She managed the programs for women, the women's programs at the Y Center, which is maybe where I first knew her some time ago when I came to Jackson in 1976. I attended one of her brown bag lunches where people talked about issues of particular interest to women, and that was not happening anywhere else, I'll tell you. It was great. While in that position, she worked with Marion Fox to start the Susan B. Anthony Awards celebration, now in its 43rd year. This event honors women and men who've lifted up the cause of women in our community. Members of this congregation who've been recipients are Marge Duane, Jan Krupa, Sharon Peterson, the late Carol Bowen, our minister Eve Bardis, the late Rosemary Herbert, the Reverend Cindy Landrum, and me. Great honor. Peg has also had another career serving on many community boards and committees. She was on the Social Services Board, Family Services and Children's Aid, United Way, Michigan League, and a long, long list of others. She prefers to think of these experiences as learning opportunities rather than as a contribution on her part, which I think describes her very well. She is always a learner, she is always curious, and she's always asking the question, have I done enough? But lest you think her all business, I would add that she's an avid fan of theater and music, and I am her fan. She is my friend. I'm so pleased that she is here today to talk about Susan B. Anthony.
Thank you, Ann. I've even brought Susan B. Anthony with me. When Marion Fox retired from the Y in 1979, I commissioned local artist Nancy Camden Hauser to create this doll as a gift for Marion. And when Marion finally had to leave Jackson a few years ago, she entrusted me with this doll. So I'm happy to have Susan with us this morning. But I want to tell you about the history of Susan B. at the Y. It was 1976, a bicentennial year, right? You may remember it, some of you who were born before that date, a lot of you were not. Marion was inspired to have a luncheon, which she called Hooray for Susan B., and it was held on Suffrage Day, August 26, 1976. Well, the response was really good. We were so pleased that So many women wanted to come and celebrate Susan B. with us. That led to thinking, well, if there's such interest in Susan B., maybe we ought to keep this going. Maybe this would be an opportunity to honor women in the community who have, in some way or another, carried on the spirit of Susan B. Perhaps not in exactly the same way, because Susan fought that good fight. And as you saw up there, so many women fought that good fight. But there are other fights to be fought. So in that spirit, we chose a number of women. For example, there was Marion Grattan, whom you may remember as a longtime writer with the Jackson Citizen Patriot. Marion organized the first chapter of NOW, National Organization of Women, in Jackson, and served as its first president. There was Florence Foster. Florence organized the first chapter of AARP in Jackson and served as its president. There was Ellie Madden Castile, whose concern for women who had experienced rape led her to do research in that field and to create a counseling center for victims of rape. Lots of issues to confront. As the years went by, Anne has referred to some of the women in this very congregation who have been honored, but we had women come to talk to us, women who had been honored by the Michigan, Women's Historical Society. Those women are part of the Michigan Women's Hall of Fame, which also was created along about this time that I'm talking about. So, as Susan B. felt so strongly that things would change once women got the right to vote, it turned out that the fight was far from over. We still had a long way to go for equality. We're still, in many ways, excuse me, I have to have a sip. She had no idea it would take so long for change actually to come. Here we are, 100 years later, still fighting many of the fights. And I suppose we'll continue to do so, although the last election looked quite promising, didn't it? We have lots of women in white, Anne, in the Congress. So that's a good thing. Let's see, Anne mentioned the Brown Bag series. I was absolutely delighted one year when First Lady Helen Milliken accepted my invitation to come and review a biography of Susan B. Anthony. That was certainly a memorable occasion. I had the pleasure of working. Well, I should mention before I go on, one of the women I worked with at the Y was Joyce Choate, who grew up in this church. Some of you may have known Joyce. I also had the extreme pleasure of working closely with Marge Duane. She was a stalwart in helping me put together a lot of the Susan B. dinners. It's been so gratifying. When I finally retired myself in 1991, a few years later, the Y chose to drop women's programs. And I was thrilled when younger women formed the Jackson Women's History Council to carry on the tradition. So here we are, up to year 43 of celebrating Susan B. Anthony and honoring women. This year's dinner, mark your calendars, will be March 10. We would love to see any of you there who would like to join us. It was on the occasion of the 40th anniversary of the Susan B. Anthony Awards presentation that we had a very special look at the work still needing to be done, and Anne will tell you more about that.
Thank you. Yep, 3 years ago, we had a presentation called The Way It Was 40 years ago in Jackson. So we looked back to recall what it was like here, right here, 40 years before. And here's some of the things that we found that we're reminded of. In the home, in 1976, there was no law against domestic abuse. There was no recourse a woman had if her husband battered her, beat her. There were no shelters. There was no counseling. There were no crisis centers. If a woman was beaten by her husband, what did she do? She could go to the emergency room, or she could go to the police. The police could come to the house, but there was no law that said the man was doing anything illegal. So they would maybe try to calm him down, maybe say, get along, but that's how it was. So battered women were generally ashamed that they were being beaten by their husbands, so they would wear long sleeves, they would wear sunglasses, and they would tell people that they walked into doors, that they fell downstairs, that it was all their fault, because it was all their fault. So by the next year, however, local activists, some of who have been sitting here in this congregation, found money to find a home and create what we now know as the Aware Shelter, which provides a safe haven for women and counseling and many, many programs in support of women. But still more was needed in 1992. So this was the year after Peg retired. Domestic violence was the leading cause of injury for women between the ages of 15 and 44. More than rapes, muggings, and car accidents combined. The Violence Against Women Act, the federal law, became law in 1994 and was signed by President Clinton. So now there are protections. In the business world, if you were a woman and you applied for a job and you looked like you were of childbearing age, you would be asked, do you intend to have children? And if you said yes, another candidate got that job. If you were hired and you got pregnant while you were on the job, you'd be put on extended leave, or you'd be forced to quit when you started to show. And then if they put you on this extended leave, you'd have to reapply for the job that you had. To get a credit card, a woman needed her husband's approval, and it was issued in the name of Mrs. John Doe. To open a checking account, she needed her husband's approval, so she couldn't manage her own money. So this was here, right here, and not all that long ago. And Alyssa Alden did some research about what it was like in 1976 for what she could tell a high school student that she might have, and Lynn will read that.
Obviously, I didn't write this, Alyssa did. I taught in high school my entire career, and students came to me with concerns. Here is a not-so-imaginary conversation I had with a high school girl in 1976. I know you'd like to be more involved in physical activities than cheerleading and square dancing, and here's some good news for you. 4 years ago, a law called Title IX was passed that prohibited sex discrimination in any educational program or activity receiving any type of federal funds. Unfortunately, it won't do you any good. You wanted to take a shop class and your boyfriend wanted to take home ec. Unlike before, it's not legal now for schools and administrators to dictate which classes you take. But like before, it hasn't been enforced yet. And you know those textbooks that where girls show themselves as nurturing wives and mothers while men are shown as powerful? Well, that is going to change, but not yet. You say you want to go on in school. Colleges and universities can't refuse to admit you like you did before. It's not legal, but it hasn't been enforced yet. And you want to play sports in college. Title IX says you can, but the NCCA is fighting it because having more women athletes might limit the athletic scholarships and money for men. And besides, there aren't many athletic scholarships for women anyway. That's illegal, but it hasn't been enforced yet. You say you have a friend who was sexually harassed. Schools have a legal obligation now to prevent and address any reported sexual harassment, but it hasn't been enforced yet. And besides, boys will be boys. You say your friend got pregnant and she's 14 and she doesn't know what to do. Well, at least it's illegal now for schools to expel her. They just haven't gotten around to enforcing that one yet. You wonder, too, where your friends can get friends like that can get information about pregnancy, prevention, and testing and counseling, like your friend needs about sexually transmitted diseases. And by the way, your friend isn't even sure if she likes boys, but doesn't know who to talk to about it. You've heard that Planned Parenthood could help. I'm sorry, there just isn't one of those in Jackson. It'll get better. It just hasn't gotten better yet. And it won't get better until women sue and sue and sue again.
Thank you, Lynn. So, you see, there's still a lot to do, isn't there? Getting better, I think. Can we all be optimistic that it is getting better? I hope so. I have very much enjoyed this opportunity to share reminiscences about Susan B. with all of you. When I think, as I was sitting and listening to Lynn, names of women kept coming to my mind. Yes, Sharon Peterson. Yes, she was honored as well, I'm sure. So many women. What a rich heritage we have here in Jackson. I'd like to think that in Jackson, the name of Susan B. Anthony is almost a household word, don't you think? And we'll take some credit for that, won't we, Marge? Won't we, Anne? Anne has been an integral part of the Jackson Women's History Council, has led the essay contest that has involved high school students in finding out more about contributions of women. So on many fronts, we move forward. Thank you all for listening so patiently to this old lady and this old